Forged with a passion for steel and an iron-like eye for talent. This is the Recruiter of Steel podcast. Blast right in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to yet another episode of the Recruiter of Steel podcast. I am pleased to be joined today by the Vice President of Strategic Sales at Majestic USA, Mr. Brian Buckalew. Brian has over 20 years of experience in the steel industry, is an executive over at Majestic Steel, and moreover is a podcaster himself with the Simply Sell podcast, who was happy to have me on a few episodes ago. So feel free to go check that one out. But Brian's doing some awesome things. He has an amazing story to tell for his career and how he got started in steel. And we're going to get right to it. So thank you, Brian, for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Tyler. Hey, thanks so much. I really look forward to being on this podcast. I like what you're doing out in the marketplace with the steel industry and recruiting people. So definitely flattered that you'd have me on here.
Thank you. Awesome. I appreciate it. And Brian, one thing I didn't touch on that intro. So you're also writing a book too, right? Tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I'm writing a book right now. It's in the editorial phase. It's going a little bit slower on the editorial phase than I would like. So hopefully we'll get that done here shortly. But it kind of talks about some of the things that I've learned from my mentors over the years and experiences too. So I was blessed, at Majestic to learn from some really good mentors. Some are still with us, some are not. But I think that if you don't take what you've learned and pass it on to other people, then two things are happening. You're being selfish, number one, and number two, you're not giving reverence to the people that have taught you. So I, cherish being able to share it, in a book or, in my day-to-day operations with people, in trying to help them with their career, because I was blessed to have been helped by other people.
Awesome. Well, we're excited. Do you have a estimated time on when that book could hit the shelves, or?
I'm hoping it will be by June. So
okay.
This is my first book. So I gotta, I got it in the editorial phase. Now I got to learn how to go with the publishing phase. And so, but the one thing I would say about the book is that it is Simply Sell. And it's different than I think most books, because it tries to relate to people that have never sold before. So sometimes when you read books, and I've read them and I've read some really good books.
Sure.
If you haven't sold before, trying to relate to those things is really hard. So I think trying to be able to keep it very simple for someone that's either coming out of college or maybe somebody that's moving into sales from another area of a company. That's who I was kind of targeting with that.
Yeah, I love that. It's so important, especially for our industry too, because there's so much tribal knowledge, right? And a lot of folks in the industry are a little bit more tenured. And for the new folks coming in, you need to pass down that knowledge, right? If we all retire and don't do anything, then we're going to have to relearn some things all over again. So kudos to you for doing that. And I would recommend any other senior executive in the steel industry who, has learned a lot over the years. Definitely do something similar to Brian. It definitely is going to help the next generation. I imagine you're assisting that book with the podcast, right? Simply Sell. We'll get into that a little bit.
I am actually. And I just had a great guest on here this past week. We just published it today, John Ferguson from Aslan Training. And then, and then having you on there, and then having, a C-suite person on there, and then having, a young person like Kyle Siebel's, my first episode, is taking somebody who's 25 years old, and he's been in purchasing and sales. So purchasing and sales are very similar, believe it or not.
Sure.
And I think, having those guests on there, and then I've got some really good guests coming up here in the next, few weeks. So I'm excited about that as well.
That's exciting. So yeah, if you're listening to this podcast, if you're subscribed to this one, I want to encourage you, go to the Simply Sell podcast by Brian Buckalew. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, I'm sure, right? And some other platforms as well.
Absolutely. Apple or Spotify, YouTube, you can find it anywhere. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, I publish all the podcasts on LinkedIn as well.
Cool. All right. Well, go follow him on LinkedIn too, and you can get the clips there as well. But awesome. Good stuff. Well, Brian, thank you for coming on. I want to get right to it. Right. So
okay.
You have a awesome story to share with how you got started in steel. I want to hear that. I want to hear the trajectory of your career because you're in a unique spot, right? Strategic sales at, a very reputable mid-sized service center as Majestic Steel is. And that's an aspiration for a lot of people and a lot of young people that are probably consuming your content and your podcast and your book that they want to get to if they're in this industry. So walk us through the beginning. How did you come into this wonderful world of steel?
Well, it's a funny story because when I was going to college, I was a cold caller for a stockbroker firm, and when I was there, and I was also teaching racquetball. I was a racquetball pro, and this was back in the late 80s, early 90s. And so I determined I did not want to be a stockbroker. I saw some of the stress that these poor people were under, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And I didn't want to do a meat grinder job. Back then, if you were selling cell phones door to door, then you couldn't just buy them online. There was no internet, there was no nothing. And so I needed to get a job that I needed to learn first how to sell before just being thrown to the wolves.
That's true.
And so it turned out I was so stressed. I wrecked my car, and it was like, it was still drivable, but it looked terrible. And I looked in the newspaper because there was no internet, and there was a job for a steel company, and it was an inside sales position. And
Okay.
I thought, okay, this is a perfect match for me. Everybody's going to need steel all the time. And it was inside sales where I could learn. It was inside sales, customer service. So I was going to interview for the job, and I said, I gotta have this job. And so I had my girlfriend at the time call Majestic Steel, and and I said, I want you to ask all these questions, like who owns the company, what industries do they sell, what products do they sell, just get all this information. And so she gave it to me, and I had it all memorized. So I walk into the interview, and the two guys that were interviewing me were two ex Pacesetter employees. And back
Wow.
then, Pacesetter and Majestic were, obviously, big time competitors back in the early 90s.
Sure.
And so I go to interview in there, and they said, well, what do they were interviewing me. I said, yeah, I know all about your company. I said, you sell to this industry. You're owned by Mr. Dennis Lebo. You've got this many employees. You got this location. These are the products. Da, da, da. And they looked at me like I had three heads. They were like, they thought I was a competitor. They thought I was a spy for one of for their competitor. And they were like, well, wait a second. How did you know this? And where did you get this information? They were all like all uptight. And I was like, well, you know what? I got to be honest with you guys. Look at my car. It's out in the parking lot. It's wrecked. I need this job. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Obviously, I had my girlfriend yesterday call here and get all this information. And they said, you're hired. They hired me right on the spot. And I was so thankful that they did. And
Wow.
literally, I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. And was so thankful for the opportunity. And so then, they were teaching me the basics of steel, the thicknesses, the billing methods, all of these things. And then they had me on the phone cold calling literally within 3 days. Within 3 days of them hiring me, they said, okay, here's an industry directory, go find us some business. And so I was cold calling people, making mistakes left
Wow.
and right. I can remember talking and saying, to a client, to a buyer who'd been buying steel for 30 years and say, oh yeah, this mill, we got some steel from this mill and they have great 60 wide. And they said, well, Brian, that mill doesn't even make 60 wide. And I'm like, oh, so I learned on the job the hard way. So it was a really good experience. And the funny thing is the one thing I remember at 22 years old is
Mm.
these guys were like, Brian, what we're teaching you right now is you just can't put a price tag on it. And at 22 years old, when you're like that, you're cocky and you're like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then when I was 32 years old, 42 years old, 52 years old, I'm thinking back to that day. I'm like, man, what these guys taught me was amazing from a standpoint of learning how to negotiate, learning billing methods, learning all these things, handling customer service. All of these things were great. And so I was their assistant for a number of years, and so it was a great experience. And but then it was kind of my time to move on, and we didn't have at that time a really good way of moving people up in the company. And obviously, with our current CEO, Todd Lebo, he's always looking at moving people up within the company, which is phenomenal. I mean, we have a great
Shout out to
culture.
Todd.
Yes, absolutely. I can't say enough nice things about him and his family. But back then there was no way, and these guys were like, Brian, there's just no way for you to move up in the company. You're kind of
Mm,
stuck. And I was like, well, I can't sit here and just make this amount of money for the rest of my
stay there
life. So
forever. Yeah.
right. So I ended up interviewing at a manufacturer job, and they offered me a job, which was way more money. And so I turned in my resignation, and the look they had on their face was the same look as they gave me when I gave them that information, and they thought I was a competitor. They're like, "Oh my God, he's leaving." And so then they had to tell Todd's father that Brian's leaving, and Todd's father at the time was owner, CEO and president, and he said, "Well, we can't let him go. What are you doing? You can't let him go." So his father personally called me and said, "Brian, I had no idea you wanted to be a sales rep. If you want to be a sales rep, I will personally stand in your corner and help you along the way." So, obviously, if it wasn't for Mr. Dennis Lebo, I would never be where I'm at today. And so the reverence that I have for him and his family are just great, because the rest is kind of history from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was our top sales rep for a number of years, and then got moved into management. So honestly, if it wasn't for Mr. Lebo, I would not be where I'm at today. So kudos to him and his family. And so it was kind of an interesting story that the two guys that hired me, I ended up selling more than them, like within a couple years. And there was some animosity there between us, but then after a while, it kind of settled down, and then we
Hmm.
ended up working together, and we've been lifelong friends. So it's just an interesting thing, how the story is, and you go from student to teacher really quick. And
Sure.
but you have to definitely be respectful, and show reverence to everybody that's kind of helped you along the way in your career.
Yeah. Well, shout out to Majestic, first of all, for giving you the job when I think the car broke down. Was that what you said happened?
I wrecked it. I
You
was in,
wrecked
in
it. Okay.
downtown Atlanta, and I ran a red light because I was all stressed about not having a job, and
Mm,
and and it was not a good experience at that time. But
yeah.
thankfully, when I got that first paycheck from them, I was able to go to the body shop and get my car fixed.
Good. Good. Well, went to good use. Well,
Yes,
kudos.
absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So a lot to unpack there, Brian. So the first thing I want to ask you, so you were 22 years old, you're fresh out of college.
Right.
You got your first start in inside sales in steel. So here's a question I get from a lot of people because, as the recruiter of steel, right? A lot of service centers, mills, companies, they contact me for people that are experienced in the industry, right? That have
Mhm.
maybe some contacts or are accustomed to selling a certain product. So I'm always talking with folks that are very already experienced in the industry. But every now and then I get folks that are outside the industry looking in, like
Mhm.
medical device or tech or another industry, right? And they see me posting about steel or they hear things about steel and they say, how do I get in? And so, two-part question for college graduates and for folks that are outside the industry, maybe they've sold for 5, 10 years elsewhere. What's the best way to break into the steel industry?
You,
Is it
you know, I
inside
would.
sales or is it a different thing?
I would
That's a
say I would
question.
say it's definitely inside sales.
Okay.
Now that we're coming back to the office now, there's
Mhm.
so much you can learn just by being in the environment. So
Yeah,
like when I was in inside sales, I would listen to all of their conversations
sure.
and that they would have with clients. I'd even listen to them, like they would go over like why I got this order or why I didn't get this order, what can I do different next time. You can't get that type of experience when you're just out on the road making sales calls. You,
Mm,
you just can't, and you're gonna learn the hard way. Plus, you can learn all the fundamentals. Can learn all the products, the
sure.
thicknesses, the billing methods, all of those things. So anybody that's coming out of college and going right into the business on the sales side, or coming from a different industry, definitely getting on the inside and working there for a year or two. It may be kind of a step back, but it's going to propel you to move forward quicker, because you're going to understand how to negotiate. You're going to understand all the fundamentals before you just get thrown out onto the road and get into what I would call like a meat grinder job.
Yeah. Okay. And that's the advice that I have been giving folks. And usually I say inside sales is your best start, just to get that osmosis in the office, right? Hearing others on the phone, fielding those calls before you're actually, meeting with a bunch of folks face to face and having to prospect and do that whole thing. Um, and then I would also suggest that folks that are on the outside, like looking in, you know, a lot of times with on the outside sales approach, I mean, we look for folks that are maybe a little bit more accustomed to selling a certain product or can speak the language directly in front of the customers. Sometimes it's a little bit better, and this is my opinion. I want to hear yours.
Hmm.
If you were to go to a word besides me now, but a service center that would more of a general line service center, right? You're
Hmm.
going to have exposure to multiple products. You're going to have exposure
Hmm.
to selling to multiple industries, right? If you're selling carbon, stainless, aluminum, long products, flat roll products, right? You're going to get the whole gambit. You're going to understand a little bit of everything, right?
Right.
Whereas if you just go to strictly hot roll carbon, right?
Hmm.
Then it's going to be difficult to then move to a specialty metals house or something like that. So,
Right.
my advice to folks looking outside in or from coming out of college is join maybe a little bit of a larger service center on the inside sales portion where you can get that training. They have a defined onboarding process. They have some more resources to train you and get you up to speed. And then you'll also have exposure to multiple products, multiple industries. And then once you have, 2, 3 years under your belt, maybe you've made it into outside sales, maybe you haven't, you could take that experience, join maybe a smaller or mid-sized service center that maybe isn't going to cap your commissions, maybe isn't going to, handhold you as much, but you'll have that autonomy, but you feel comfortable doing it because you've learned and, you've kind of learned the ropes, right?
Hmm.
So that's my general words of advice to folks on the outside looking in. But if you have anything else, I'd love for our audience to hear it.
First of all, I think that approach is great. I mean, if you look at me, I don't mind telling you where I'm weak at.
Mm-hmm.
I've told you how great I am for like the last 20 minutes, and I'm going to tell you where I'm not very good. I don't know aluminum. I don't know stainless. I don't know electrical steel. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know bar. I don't know structural. I don't know any of that stuff, plate, any of that. Okay. So if I were to say, hey, I know all these products, no, I don't. So I think for someone getting into the industry, and you can either go two routes. Number one, go to the route you said, which would be, learning all the products and working for a larger service center, or going to a company that offers a lot of really good training program,
Yeah,
a lot of good expertise in a certain area. But no matter where you go, I would say at Majestic, we have a really good training program
you do.
for
Yes.
people. And
Mm-hmm.
so our onboarding we just hired a couple guys who are veterans in the industry, and they were like, man, this onboarding process, I've never seen anything like it. They were like, I mean, these guys have been doing this for like 20 years. So I know that our onboarding process is really good. So no matter where you go, even if it's a full line service center that has all the products, I would say getting in there and getting a very good onboarding process is huge for anybody, whether
Massive.
you know the business or don't. Getting in there and getting in the onboarding thing is very, very critical.
Massive. That's such a good point. I don't want to get off topic. I want to get back to your story and how you got to where you are, but I have to touch on that point. Onboarding process is critical. I've talked with a lot of service centers out there that don't have anything. They don't even have a CRM, right? They're throwing people into the fire and say, go, right? And
Right.
some people sink, some people swim, but there also are some that maybe if just with a few lessons they'd be able to swim just fine too, right? So
Mhm.
you need that good onboarding process, and Majestic I know does have a great onboarding process. So what I before we get back to your story, I just want your thoughts on this. Companies that are listening, executives, folks that are owners of other service centers, smaller, medium sized, whatever it may be, um, how do you craft an effective onboarding process? What is Majestic doing that these other companies aren't, that is helping people get up to speed so quickly?
Well, I would say coming out of the gate, we're really good at teaching people fundamentals, and then understanding, the supply side of the business as well as the sales side. So like
Okay.
for instance, you can understand the sales side, know the industries, know the end uses, know the accounts and everything. And I can remember, Todd actually saying to me like 10 years ago, he said, Brian, he said, you're great on the sales side, but you need work on the supply side. You need to know who the mills are. You need to know this, you need to know that. And so part of my reinvention process was understanding the supply side of it. And that actually made me a lot better. So you could see that someone who had been doing this, 10, 15 years, could actually learn something new to be able to improve their game. So I would say, understand we're really good at teaching people the supply side of it as well as the sales side of it and the fundamentals in understanding all the products to be able to be armed and dangerous, to be able to talk to clients and to be able to be able to be successful. And that takes time. I mean, you can't jump right into it and then 3 or 4 months be able to pick up on it. It takes a while to understand all the products, what end uses they go to, why do people buy this product versus that product, all the gauges, all the sizes, understanding what we inventory, what we don't inventory,
Right.
and understanding what mills out there make what. I think it's a process that takes a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you for those piece of advice. I think that's definitely helpful for others out there. But no, Brian, you're in a good big seat right now, Vice President of Strategic Sales, right? So you started off on inside sales, you know, was kind of stuck there for a little bit. You got an offer from a manufacturer. You went there, you made some more money, but then you came back. So tell me, what coming back was like and how you got to where you are now.
Well, just to clarify, I didn't take the other job. It
Oh, you
was
didn't
offered
take
to
it.
me. I
Okay,
didn't take it.
You
It was
didn't.
offered to me. I
Okay,
never, so officially never left Majestic. So I was
never.
caught
Okay,
before I walked
one
out the
and
door.
done.
So that's a good thing.
Cool.
As far as going back to as far as reinventing myself throughout my career, I mean, technology is so big. I mean, back then, we would have like these industry guides that were like this big, and you'd go through papers and try to find somebody. And then the internet came along, in the early 2000s. And then I was like, oh my God, this thing called Google. I can find out who manufactures what. And that was really helpful. So I think being able to use technology and reinventing myself there. And then all of a sudden things started to change because in the industry, because, in the last 15 years, you've gone away from the plant manager or maybe the office assistant buying steel to now being dealing with like strategic sourcing people and supply
Mm,
chain management people. Those people have kind of replaced the so-called purchasing agent.
mm.
And so steel is now becoming a more of a strategic item for people to buy.
When did that
So
shift take place, do you think?
why or when?
Or both, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why I think it took place was because back in like the, you know, early 2000s, late 90s, that time frame, companies were mismanaging their steel supply chains. They
Sure.
were constantly running out. They didn't have forecasting, they didn't have ERP systems, they didn't have strategic sourcing programs put together. They would just place orders and either with the mill or service centers, and there were no contracts that you could speak of. And so, I mean, everything was basically spot. There was no, I mean, people didn't talk much about the CRU, if at all.
Okay.
So it was very, very Fred Flintstone-ish, if you will.
Okay.
And so um, all of a sudden, around, in the 2000s, it started to develop more supply chain people started coming into the business.
Mm,
Now is where you were dealing with people, at the plant level that knew a lot about steel, but didn't know anything about supply chain. Well,
mm.
now you've got people coming into the industry that were maybe from medical or from,
Hmm.
uh, food or whatever that were coming in and trying to and running supply chains, but they didn't know anything about steel. And
Totally
so you're
different
like,
conversation now.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it was you had to kind of reinvent yourself there
Hmm.
and be understanding that piece, understanding that hey, business is going away from more spot to contract and understanding how to sell more solutions to people
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, if you could come up with a solution for somebody, then that's going to go a long way for the supply chain person more so than just a purchasing agent.
Sure.
So
Sure.
that was a big reinvention there for myself, and then understanding the supply side of it was big. I took some classes during COVID on supply chain management, like at Michigan State, executive training program there to learn more about strategic sourcing,
Okay.
supply chain management. So when I walk in and I go see a client, and I say, well, instead of saying, hey, you know, what's your, what are you buying? And here's my price. Give me a PO. It was more along the lines of, hey, what are some of the things that you're dealing with as it pertains to assurance of supply, mitigation of risk, cost avoidance, and cost removal? Because those are the things. And the minute you start talking about that, they're going to be like, well, wait a second. How do you know all these things?
Mm-hmm.
I took a class on supply chain management, just like I had my girlfriend call the company, and they're
Sure.
they're giving me that same look again that the guys that hired me gave. And so now you're kind of, instead of being below them, you're now at their level.
Mm.
And so that helps from a standpoint of being able to communicate and then being different than the rest of the people that are maybe calling on them.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, you've rose from the ranks from inside sales to now vice president of strategic sales. Do you feel like, what do you think you could attribute that growth to? Was it that, constant looking for self-development like you did with those classes? Is it what you're doing inside the job, maybe outside, a little bit of both? I mean, what would you
I think
attribute
it's
that rise to?
I think it's a little bit of everything. Yeah, I think it's yeah, I'm pretty driven to succeed, and
Okay.
so I don't really live in a competitive world anymore. I used to a long time ago, more in creating opportunities. So I felt
Mhm.
like if I learn these things, then it's going to create more opportunities for me to be to bring something different to the table. Because if you're like everyone else, then you're kind of just in this one little area. But if you're different than everyone else, then you can kind of be treated differently. And that's what we want as salespeople, to be treated differently than everyone else.
Sure, sure. So talk about your role currently, right? Because I see, at least from your LinkedIn here,
Mhm.
you were vice president of business development from 2019 to 2022. But in 2022, you took on a different role, vice president of strategic sales. So what is the difference between the two, and how are you, as you've told me before, almost like a little bit of a secret weapon for Majestic?
Mhm. I would say, in my opinion, that the business development was constantly just opening up new business, developing, kicking open doors, that sort of thing.
Yep.
But what's funny is if you've been at a company for as long as I have been, you've either been a customer service rep on account, handled an account, um, you know, been involved in some way with an account. And it's funny, the longer you're there, it's like the more contacts that you have. And so my role is interesting because I'll go to SMU and people say, well, what do you actually do? And then I got to really go through and tell them. So there is a business development piece. I still cold call today.
Okay.
And so I'm a big cold caller. That's number one. Number two, I get involved with accounts that maybe we've lost our way with. So, obviously, if something fell through the cracks or the different changes or whatever, typically I can go back in and say, okay, hey, you know what? Before we were doing this, and this, but we're not doing this, and this anymore. Why
Hmm.
is that the case, and what problem can we solve?
Right.
So that's another piece of it. The third piece is being able to go into a client and coming up with some sort of strategic solution for them.
Okay.
So as opposed to just finding out, okay, well, they buy 1,000 tons a month, and they buy from traders, and they do this and they do that. Well, that's all great, but what kind of solution do they need? Do they
Sure.
need something in the form of risk mitigation? Because if a boat's late, what do they do? The
Right.
mill is late, what do they do? You know, if you think about it, every one of us has homeowners insurance or life insurance. Well,
Hmm.
why do we have that? Because of the fact that we may die, our house may burn down, something may happen. So if we can provide as a supplier, we're not a mill, we're not a trader, but if we can provide something that's different in the form of risk mitigation call it supply insurance, if you will, with some of the resources that we have at Majestic, well, then now all of a sudden you're giving them a solution.
Hmm.
Or you can say, hey, with this specification that you have right here, you're buying something that's very outdated, it's non-standard, you're paying more for it, and it's harder to get. What if we were to, give you this product here that is virtually the same, is more standard, easier to get, and less expensive? Would you be interested in that? Well, yeah, I would be. And then all of a sudden, boom, you've got a solution that you're giving to them. So when you're talking about strategic, it's outward strategic, it's inward strategic, it's a little bit of business development, from a standpoint of cold calling. Sometimes, some of the sales reps will come to me and say, hey, I got a problem here. How would you solve it? Here's what I would do to solve it. I can get on the virtual call with your client if you like, or if you want to handle it on your own,
Sure.
that's totally fine. So, so those. My role is kind of multifaceted, and so yeah, I'm doing a lot of different things and involved in a lot of things that at the end of the day, generate revenue for Majestic.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, congratulations. You've had a heck of a career. What would be your words of advice to other sellers in the industry?
My words of advice would be learn your craft. That is the one thing. The one thing I got from one of my mentors that hired me, and it shook me up really hard. He said, Brian, this is not a job. This is a career. You need to apply yourself. And that is the thing that I still remember today,
Mm.
is that, it's not a job. It's a career. And you've constantly got to be, ahead of the game. You constantly got to know your craft. You constantly got to know the supply side, the sales side, even how to deal with, the credit side. I mean, there's nothing more than a credit person likes is when a salesperson gets involved to help them get paid,
Mm.
because we live in a world where people hide behind their email and their cell phones and caller ID
True.
and this and that. And when, when you're dealing with a somebody that's not paying you, you got to get all the help you can get to get paid. And so I would say try to be as helpful as you possibly can with your teammates in trying to help them, do their job, because you're going to need them to help you do your job. And so that's what I would say. It's a career, and try to be as helpful as you can to your coworkers as well as your clients.
Great words of advice. And if you're looking to level up your career, you know who to call. Anyways, what would you be your words of wisdom to sales managers out there, folks that are leading a team that are looking to grow?
I would say the best advice I can give, and I'm not the greatest manager. I don't. I'm going to tell you another thing I'm not good at. I'm not good at managing, people per se. I can manage
Okay.
opportunities, but
Okay.
the best advice I can give them is to get your get your salespeople to figure out a way to sell steel as if it's not a commodity. So many people you're always going to hear on the buy side and even on the sell side, they're going to say, well, steel is a commodity. Steel is a commodity. Okay, I can go with you on that the product itself is a commodity. How you buy and sell it is not.
Mm.
And I would say that is my best word of wisdom. Whether you're on the buy side and you're buying steel, understanding it's not a commodity. And I mean, the product is, but how you buy it is not. And on the
Right.
sales side, it's the same thing. How you sell the product, it's not a commodity. And if you've ever been to a steel mill, I've been to a number of them, and you see people out there at the mill risking their lives to produce a product, you'll have more reverence for what's being produced.
Sure. That's great, great words of advice there. Brian, this has been great. You have a
Thank you.
fantastic story. You have lots of words of wisdom. I'm really looking forward to your book, Simply Sell, which hopefully will hit the shelves by this summer. That seems to be the goal. If anybody, again, is listening to this podcast, please check out Brian's Simply Sell podcast. You can do that on virtually any platform. And Brian, where could folks connect with you if they want to get connected?
My website's still being built. It's going to be brianbuckalew.com.
Okay.
I'm working on that. And then LinkedIn is the best way. I'm on there all the time, writing articles. I'm posting things like my podcast and things. I post stuff about the market. So, I'm very thankful to work at Majestic and being able have a platform to be able to, talk about what we're doing as a company. I think what we are doing is very, it's very instrumental to helping people. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'd be more than happy to converse with you.
Absolutely. Awesome. I want to give you the floor. This has been great, Brian. So any final thoughts for our audience? Any last things that we didn't cover?
I can't think of anything. I think we've covered everything. I would just say at this point, I'm very grateful for everybody that I've connected with, whether it's on the buy side, clients, or other people I've worked with, in inside Majestic and outside Majestic. So, very grateful for what I have.
Awesome. Well, this has been great, Brian. Thank you for your words of wisdom. Thank you for sharing your career story and how you got to where you are now. It is a real inspiration to a lot of sellers and probably a lot of folks that are listening to this podcast. So keep fighting the good fight. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep sharing the wealth and the information through your podcast, your books, and coming on guest appearances like this. This is great. And till next time, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Tyler.
Of course.
Thanks for listening to the Recruiter of Steel podcast. If you enjoyed our finished product, please subscribe and leave a rating. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one.